110th got orders to retreat, no reinforcement. Nobody wants to be like nobody wants to give the order to retreat, and they don't have the reinforcements to give, and so they just hold, but I mean, look, they're saying that they still have troops in the outskirts of Velyka Novosilka, but I don't know how much I buy that. I mean, it's possible, but I mean, they've been pushed out of the vast majority of the city. It's pretty bad. City, town, it's like 5,000 people. Like, was the town before the war. I think I used the word city too loosely. If I'm talking about Zaporizhia, the city of Zaporizhia, and a town of 5,000 people with the same word, I think there's a problem. Okay, let's just talk about the situation around Velyka Novosilka, because I do want to talk about it. It's pretty bad, and we need to go through an update. So we've already given updates all along the front on other parts of the stream. Not this stream, but other streams recently, but I'll give a quick one. The Russians wanted to push the Ukrainians out of Kursk by New Year's. They failed. They pushed them out of 40% of Kursk, but as of a few months ago, that started to slow down, and they are not going to be able to do that by the end of the month, even with North Korean reinforcements and the amount of mechanized assaults that they have dedicated in this region, which is at a much higher tempo than in other areas of the war, as the Russians are desperate to make sure the Ukrainians lose their possible bargaining chip at the negotiating table, and they're unwilling to accept both the domestic political conditions that it is creating and any condition where the Ukrainians hold parts of internationally recognized Russian territory, turning the tables on them. So Ukrainians lost 40% of what they did hold, held out past what the Russians wanted to push them out, and the fighting continues at extremely high losses to the attackers and high losses to the defenders, but to keep up the pace of attack, the Russians have taken very high losses. The situation around, Kharkiv has not really changed all that much. I mean, the last major movement on this axis, I think, was the retaking of the aggregate plant in the south of Vovchansk months ago. Yeah, if I remember correctly. So there hasn't been much activity up here. I mean, there's been activity, just haven't been much movement up here. Situation in Kupyansk is the same as it was before. They are continuing trying to push southward past Kupyansk down in the direction of Donetsk, but they've been able to not really get that far in this direction. In fact, the Ukrainians are holding them right here, and so they've been unable to continue to push down, and so they've still been in this kind of, I don't want to say cauldron, because it's not a cauldron, but they're held on two sides, and so it's an area where they're taking, a significant amount of losses, but they are still trying to push in the countryside over in this direction. They have been unable to re-enter Kupyansk itself, but are trying to push past the Oskil River, over it, and try to push on into the general Kharkiv region anyway. Now, this hasn't had a particularly successful amount of breakthrough success, we've gone across Oskil, now we're moving towards the city of Kharkiv itself again, but it has had some success in some of the patchworks and villages in this area as they continue to try to fight through a lot of these areas, which have a decent amount of foliage and tree lines and villages they're going to hop through over and over if they intend to do that. Not to mention, supporting these operations over the Oskil River is going to be logistically difficult. Now, the situation around Toretsk, well, first, Chasiv Yar, not good. The Russians have captured roughly 50% of Chasiv Yar at this point, and they're fighting well into the city center, with much of what was the east of it already captured in its entirety. Northern Chasiv Yar now captured in its majority, and now it is just the center of Chasiv Yar that is being fought over right now as the Russians pummel it with mortars and drones and infantry assaults, fighting room by room, trying to clear out the Ukrainians block by block at a time. The Ukrainians have held Chasiv Yar much longer than many people would have anticipated. I remember visiting it for the Dima documentary back during 2023, and they were talking about like the fall of Chasiv Yar. It's the next big battle, and it is held out for an extremely long amount of time. And I'm not saying that it's about to fall right now. What I'm saying is that there's a general trend that this battle is going towards. They have crossed the canal long ago. They have now started fighting from dacha to dacha, village house to village house. They've pushed through now probably the majority of Chasiv Yar, and are now, it is now the defenders, the Ukrainians, that hold a minority of Chasiv Yar. And while they can still dish out a decent amount of casualties, and they can make it so that each time they take a house, they have to take casualties to take it, the general trend seems to be that the Ukrainians are going to be pushed out of Chasiv Yar and pushed into defending Shevchenko, which is right behind it. If that name sounds familiar, it's because there's a million villages named Shevchenko. Get used to it. Shevchenko Avenue, Shevchenko's mailbox, Shevchenko everything. But it is very likely that in the near future that the Ukrainians are going to be pushed out of Chasiv Yar as well. But the fighting in the Chasiv Yar area is going to continue, as they still haven't taken the villages behind Chasiv Yar, and will then have to push on forward. The thing that scares me, though, after the village of Chasiv Yar is that they move on to, I said not the village of Chasiv Yar, the city of Chasiv Yar, is Konstantinivka is next. And there are a lot of really nice people in Konstantinivka. I know a lot of people in Konstantinivka, and it has been a hub for the battle in defense of Donetsk. It has been where people go before they go to Chasiv Yar, where people go before they go down south to Toretsk. It is a logistical center that supports locations like Toretsk, and Toretsk right now is in a terrible state. If you've seen footage of Toretsk, I think it might be worth it for me to pull this up right now, just some footage of Toretsk, honestly, because the whole city is a shell of its former self. And that's the thing that will always really just be terrible about this war, is that no matter how much nonsense is said about it, about liberating these cities from, the oppression of the Kiev or whatever, there is no cities left. It can't be liberation if there is no city. It may be liberation in the idea that even for the Ukrainians, like, you're not liberating somebody's home, you're liberating the place where their home used to be, and it's a question of rebuilding your home. Here we go. This is from January 6th. So this is a little old, but you get the idea. I mean, when I was in the Toretsk direction, like looking towards Toretsk, like smoke was like semi-regular. Like 12 hours out of the day, something in Toretsk is smoking, and you can see it rising out of the city, if not even in many instances the majority out of the day. But many of the buildings themselves are literally just craters, or like they are shells of buildings where you might be able to see like the walls that are left. The like half of certain apartment buildings are either just completely taken off, as if like you had taken off the head of the entire structure, or sometimes like the middle of it will be caved in because the bomb strikes in the middle, and so it's almost like one strip of building, one strip of apartment blocks has turned almost into two like apartment skyscrapers. I mean, it's the type of destruction that is in Toretsk is absolute. There's not really anything left of Toretsk outside of defensive military positions and buildings that have not completely collapsed in on themselves, but are long since abandoned and at least burnt out. Outside of that, the real bad situation, if you go around Pokrovsk, the situation is about where it was last time we talked about it. They're trying to envelop it from the east. As you can see here, they're trying to go northward from the east to envelop it from that direction, while continuing to crawl westward and try to push northward from this westward push, so it can develop it from this direction as well, with the general idea being that they would go and they would surround it from here, and then they would surround it from here, and then you would be able to surround Pokrovsk, and then eventually during that process, the math for defending Pokrovsk would become so bad because this road out of Pokrovsk could be so constantly hit that they wouldn't want to defend it anymore. At least that would be the idea, right? Now, they have been trying to push for that for months, and they've been pushing for it at high casualties, but they have been making some marginal progress. The real threat, though, over this area that I immediately want to talk about, since there hasn't been any big moves in this direction, has to be, and of course, Kharkiv has long fallen, and we're seeing this last defense, this last hold in the Constantinople, Adrivka area of southern Donetsk. The fall of Velyka Novosilka is probably the biggest, most immediate, devastating loss. The most devastating since the fall of Kharkiv. And the reason why is the 110th Mechanized Brigade were assigned Velyka Novosilka to defend it. And from everything that I've heard, both publicly and privately, is that they were not given significant reinforcements with manpower, and that the Russians had, of course, as is the case in many, many other locations, a significant manpower advantage. And after crawling into this northern area to take this and bringing pressure from the north, the south, and the west with much more significant manpower upon this small town of about 5,000 people, they have been able to take over the vast majority of Velyka Novosilka. Now, the Ukrainians say that they continue to hold the outskirts of Velyka Novosilka. So this would mean that they're holding, these buildings, probably, if I was to guess, right, probably these buildings over here, maybe that little tree line, that doesn't really matter, but that little tree line there, these buildings over here, and you can see that, the buildings are being attacked as of recent, so that would make sense. And so they're not completely kicked out of the Velyka Novosilka area. There is still fighting ongoing in this area, but that the Ukrainians have generally been pushed out of it, and the Russians are also bringing pressure upon this direction of the front and other areas here as well, like in these big open fields, so they can try to overpower the Ukrainians with their manpower advantage, so that instead of concentrating all their troops to defend this little strip of land, they have to move troops out here as well to defend against this. And Ukrainians are shelling these assaults, they're attacking these motorcycle assaults, but it's just the manpower advantage is very significant and was a deciding factor. They've not been completely pushed out, but they've just about have been completely pushed out of this area. Now, there is, they've said that there's some advantages the defenders here have. For example, there's this river here, which is called the Morki Yalvi. I forget. It's just the Morki River, which is defensible. For example, if they're assaulting across this river, it's hard for them to get across it. But also, they've gotten across this river in some areas, so they can cross it anyway. So I don't really get that. It's oh, they have this defensive advantage. I mean, yeah, in some locations. Right? In some locations here, if you look at where the river is, it goes right through Velyka Novosilka. And so, if they're fighting along any amongst these areas, they go northward, and they're trying to go, westward in order to head towards the Zaporizhia Oblast, which is about 15 kilometers away. And the last thing we want is not only the more pressure on the Zaporizhia Oblast, but they're also 20 kilometers away from the Dnipro Oblast, which has been completely unoccupied. The Oblast has not been occupied, so they'd be introducing the war now to a new Ukrainian Oblast. In those one specific instances where you go northward and are trying to cross the river, yes, it's useful, but I don't really buy it outside of that, because there's also these other areas they still need to advance. I think the reason why they're mentioning it, though, is that there's the fear that these positions that have been built up defensively in the south and Zaporizhia are going to be flanked, and I think that is also what the Russians would like to do, because if they can move 15 kilometers distance, if they can get across this area over this way, right, then you're entering the Zaporizhia Oblast, you're entering this administrative district, and now you're not only attacking Zaporizhia from the south, you're now also attacking it from the east as well. And while Zaporizhia already has its own problems, and we've seen troop buildups in the south, if they're being attacked from two fronts, it's going to make it that much more difficult to hold these front-line cities and towns like Kulipole that are necessary to keep the battle away and away from Zaporizhia, so that they could shell the city or do other things that could devastate the civilian population, where many people have fled to from other places, like Mariupol. A lot of the people in Mariupol fled to Zaporizhia. A lot of them fled to Dnipro. These locations that, these battles are going to have a significant impact on whether or not they can crawl forward in this direction. Now, as you can see, there's a lot of space in these areas. But I mean, we saw what happened with the Arachne breakthrough, where like 10 to 15 kilometers can get cleared in a few weeks. And you have a few weeks becomes a few months. You have 1 or 2 of those types of breakthroughs again, and you can have a real problem. You have a real problem, assuming you don't have an even worse breakthrough. The situation around Velyka Novosilka is not good. They do have troops out on the outskirts, so they haven't been completely kicked out, but I do think that'll probably happen in the near future. And now they're going to be doing these village by village fighting as they try to build up defensive lines in this oblast to stop them from getting to the city itself. Oh, and of course, any advancements this way also complicate the already desperate defensive situation in southern Donetsk, which, if I'm going to be honest with you, I don't think that we'll even have enough time to develop enough to become that significant of a problem. Maybe it will. Maybe it will. Either way, bad. There was an article about this that I did want to actually read. Potential encirclements in Velyka Novosilka prompts questions about last-ditch withdrawal strategy. Somebody was talking about this earlier. The fact that a lot of these people are not given orders to withdraw until the very last second, if at all. And how that causes haphazardly and chaotic withdrawals that loses a lot of lives when the Ukrainians already have a manpower problem. Thrusting forward with their vast manpower advantage, Russian troops are gradually penetrating Ukrainian defenses on the western edge of the Donetsk Oblast and are close to capturing Velyka Novosilka. Located about 15 kilometers east of neighboring Dnipro Oblast, the vital road junction village was once home to around 5,000 people. It is now facing a similar fate to other Donbass strongholds, where Ukraine's delayed withdrawals resulted in avoidable casualties, according to military experts. Russian troops appear to have cut into the center of Velyka Novosilka, likely dividing the town into two and trapping Ukrainian troops in the south, according to Pasi Patroni at Finland, at a Finland-based open source intelligence organization, Blackbird Group, which you can follow on Twitter. They are good. He said that on January 25th, the southern pocket appears to have just fallen, with the Ukrainians likely holding on to Velyka Novosilka's northwestern areas and Russia expected to complete the capture in days. The Russian Defense Ministry claimed on January 24th that its troops had planted a Russian flag in the center of Velyka Novosilka and they had split the town in two, cutting off Ukrainian forces. As you can see now, we were showing before, now they have like 95% of the village. The town. It is unclear how many Ukrainian troops were trapped inside the southern pocket, but it could be around 2 or 3 battalions. Damn, Jesus Christ. He added that given the dire manpower situation in Ukraine, these battalions were likely depleted, with only a few hundred troops remaining in total. The question is if it's closer to 1,000 or closer to a few hundred. And considering how bad the manpower situation is, it's probably going to be closer to several hundred, he told the Kiev Independent, adding that is purely a rough estimate due to the lack of official information. This is actually a picture of one of the soldiers of the 110th, which was the mechanized brigade defending Velyka Novosilka. Hope he's okay. Ukrainian military spokesperson Viktor Cheperov said on January 23rd that the risk of encirclement persists for Ukrainian troops in Velyka Novosilka, as Russia is attempting to cut off routes into the town with heavy fire. He claimed that Ukraine's military has the situation under control and is working to prevent the encirclement. Yeah, okay. Velyka Novosilka is currently in a difficult situation, acknowledging the town's topography, such as the narrow Marki Yar River, further complicates the defense. As Ukraine tries to hold on to the Donetsk Oblast strongholds, no matter how close Russian troops are to capturing them, more Ukrainian soldiers and Western experts are raising concerns about the cost of such decisions. Similarly to the situation unfolding in Velyka Novosilka, exhausted Ukrainian troops defending the town of Avdiivka, located just outside of Russian-occupied Donetsk, were left behind and around the town. Multiple surviving soldiers told the Kiev Independent in February of 2024. 2 soldiers from the 110th Separate Mechanized Brigade, which is currently defending Velyka Novosilka and facing a similar fate, have recounted how they have had to leave behind dozens of their wounded comrades in order to increase their own chances of survival. Damn, Jesus, fuck, that's awful. If Russia captures Velyka Novosilka, it will be the first notable victory of 2025. Russian troops have been on the offensive for more than a year, capturing long-time Ukrainian strongholds in the Donetsk Oblast, including Avdiivka, Volodar, Soldove, and Kharkiv in 2024. Elsewhere on the front line, Russian troops are gradually pushing Ukrainian forces out of the salient that they control in the Kursk Oblast. Well, I mean, it was more 40% like a few months ago, and now it's, I mean, it is gradually still, but now it's a lot slower. Meanwhile, the city of the Kupyansk in the Kharkiv Oblast is facing another Russian offensive. Russia's imminent seizure of Velyka Novosilka comes about a year and a half after Ukraine began a counteroffensive in the summer of 2023. What is that relevant to? Velyka Novosilka's fall could impact the situation in Zaporizhia and the Dnipro Oblast, as only open fields lie beyond the villages. According to, well, no, that's according to Siri. That's not according to anybody. That's just what it is. But he stressed that it took a long time for Russia to finally come close to capturing Velyka Novosilka, and that holding on to the village makes sense because it is exhausting Moscow's resources that could be used elsewhere. Russia's troops are attacking only on one relatively narrow front line. This is the price of holding on. Russia's capture of Verminka, a village just southwest of Velyka Novosilka, and then Novry-Komar, a village to its north, gradually cutting off supply routes for the Ukrainian troops. It's the same thing they do everywhere. They took a village and the roads to the north and to the south of it, creating a condition where you either have to retreat or have to try to fight for those positions back because you're going to have a kill salient for anybody who even tries to retreat. He stressed that the sharp contrast in his manpower leverage has allowed Moscow to gradually advance despite the costs, and that it is impossible to prevent it. Russian tactics remain unchanged, relying on the continuous deployment. Well, it's impossible to prevent it if conditions don't change. Yes, if they don't make manpower decisions that are difficult but necessary, and if there are not the necessary munitions deployments. Russian tactics remain unchanged, relying on continuous deployments of small groups of 5 to 7 assault soldiers until enough troops are gathered to properly advance on a nearby Ukrainian position. They accumulate 20 to 30 or even 50 people for certain positions, and it can last for weeks, and this group moves forward. Imagine being 2 people in a trench with 50 Russian soldiers storming towards you. Awful position. Awful position. I mean, there's going to be a point where the Russians swing themselves out if the Ukrainians are given the resources necessary to make this painful. And it has been painful. And even at this pace, eventually they will swing themselves out. But you want to speed that process up so they advance not as far. You make them slow down quicker, make them do less damage quicker, and try to come to a conclusion much faster. So, I mean, it's either not shore up the Ukrainians and risk a catastrophe of a breakthrough that will then move the war deeper and deeper into the country, or shore up the Ukrainians, which might cost some of our military reserves, yes, might even cost some money, might even cost the Europeans to spend a dime or two, but that'll mean giving them the reserves necessary to be able to make the decisions consciously to put new recruits, younger recruits in uniform, knowing that they're going to have the gear necessary to actually stem the tide. And then once they've done that, then it creates a condition where if the Russians want to end the war, the only way they can is by negotiating with the Ukrainians at the table, because they've shown that they can defend themselves and they can assert their own sovereignty with their allies. What is Ukraine's best course of action at this point? Oh, well, I think I already just said what the best course of action is, but I mean, it's better to make the difficult decisions about manpower earlier than later, because the more you delay the decision, the more painful it's going to be. And then when you find you're at a certain defensive point where you need to hold it, and you're making calls like defend, 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 and you're not making the, what would be, like with military logic, a rational decision to withdraw because you don't have the manpower to defend it. Like, if you're going to keep making these decisions not to announce withdrawals or now to order withdrawals, then you have to have the resources to defend these places, or you're just going to end up losing people in the mess of an eventual withdrawal, even if done by force of the attacker. I think I'm going to go get something to drink because I'm out of that.